Welcome back, my wonderful learners. He was born far from the marble halls of the Vatican, far from the grand churches and towering basilicas where popes are remembered. He grew up in an immigrant neighborhood in Buenos Aires, surrounded not by cardinals and bishops, but by factory workers, street vendors, and mothers struggling to feed their children. His name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, a young boy who knew nothing of papal robes, conclaves, or global influence. Yet the world would one day know him as Pope Francis, the first pope from the Southern Hemisphere, the first Jesuit pope, the first to take the name Francis, and the first in centuries to reshape the image of what a pope could be. This is his story, a story of humility, controversy, courage, and transformation. A story that begins not in Rome, but in the simple home of a railway worker, where faith, struggle, and compassion were learned long before the title Holy Father ever came into sight. Jorge Bergoglio was born on December 17, 1936, in Flores, a modest neighborhood in Buenos Aires. His parents were Italian immigrants who had fled Italy's economic crisis and rising fascism in search of a better life. His father, Mario, worked on the railways. His mother, Regina, took care of the home and their 5 children. Life was not glamorous. The family lived simply, cooking meals from scratch, attending church regularly, and leaning on their faith during times of difficulty. But what they lacked in luxury, they made up for in love, warmth, and values. Jorge was a quiet child, observant rather than outspoken. He loved soccer, enjoyed dancing the tango, a beloved Argentine tradition, and liked spending time with friends. But beneath the normal rhythms of childhood lay something deeper, a contemplative mind, a heart drawn toward service, and a sensitivity to the suffering of others. These traits would follow him throughout his life, shaping his decisions in ways even he could not foresee. At 21, Jorge experienced a profound moment that changed the course of his life forever. It was the Feast of St. Matthew, and he planned to meet friends before heading out for a night of celebration. But something led him first to stop at his local parish, the Basilica of San Jose de Flores. There, in confession, he felt overwhelmed by a sense of divine mercy. He later described it as God looking at him with love. That moment moved him so deeply that he abandoned his earlier plans and instead felt called to the priesthood. He didn't announce it with fanfare. He didn't declare it to the world. He simply walked out of the church with a new direction in life, one centered on service, humility, and obedience to God. But before he could become a priest, he had to accept a challenge far greater than academics or theological study, a battle for his own health. As a young man, Jorge contracted severe pneumonia, leaving his lungs so damaged that doctors had to remove part of one lung. The surgery was risky, the recovery long. Yet he survived, a moment that would later give him a deep compassion for the sick and vulnerable. It also taught him something essential. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and a gift to be protected. In 1958, Jorge Bergoglio entered the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, an order known for discipline, intellect, missionary work, and commitment to education. Jesuits are thinkers, scholars, and often reformers. Their training is famously long and rigorous. Bergoglio accepted it willingly. He studied chemistry, philosophy, theology, and literature, and became known for his sharp mind and simple lifestyle. While others sought titles or recognition, he preferred the background, serving quietly, listening, learning. Yet leadership followed him anyway. He became a teacher, then a spiritual director, and eventually at just 36 years old, the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina. The role placed him in a position of authority during one of the darkest chapters in Argentina's history, the Dirty War. From 1976 to 1983, Argentina was ruled by a brutal military dictatorship. Tens of thousands of people, students, journalists, priests, activists, were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. The nation lived in fear. The church itself struggled to navigate the chaos. Bergoglio faced difficult decisions, often forced to balance the safety of his fellow Jesuits with the demands of the regime. Some later accused him of not doing enough. Others argued he secretly protected several people, hiding them in safe houses or helping them escape. Decades later, as Pope, Bergoglio would speak openly about the wounds of that time. He would ask forgiveness for the sins of the church during the dictatorship. And while historians still debate aspects of his role, what remains clear is that the experience shaped his deep commitment to justice, human dignity, and reconciliation. After serving as Jesuit provincial, he spent years teaching, reflecting, and rebuilding his spiritual approach. By the 1990s, he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires, then archbishop, and eventually cardinal by Pope John Paul II. But even with rising titles, he refused to adopt the luxuries often associated with high-ranking clergy. While many bishops lived in grand residences, he chose a small apartment. He cooked his own meals. He traveled by bus and subway, refusing private chauffeurs. He visited slums regularly, washing the feet of the poor, listening to their stories, and caring for their needs. He became known as the Bishop of the Barrios. He was respected not because he demanded it, but because he earned it, through presence, compassion, and authenticity. Then, in 2013, news spread across the world. Pope Benedict XVI had resigned, the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years. The church was shaken. A new pope would be chosen during one of the most complicated periods in modern Catholic history. Scandals, corruption, declining membership, financial crises, and internal divisions threatened the church's moral authority. Cardinals gathered from every continent for the conclave. Among them was Jorge Bergoglio, a man who had once nearly been elected pope in 2005. But this time, things were different. The cardinals were searching for someone outside the traditional power circles, someone humble, someone capable of moral renewal. In the Sistine Chapel, after days of voting, white smoke rose from the chimney. Habemus Papam, we have a pope. But when Jorge Bergoglio stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the world witnessed something unexpected. He didn't appear as a distant monarch. He didn't lift his arms in triumph. He stood quietly, simply. He bowed his head and asked the crowd to pray for him before he blessed them. His first words captured his essence: humility, humanity, and an invitation to walk together. Then he announced his papal name, Francis, inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor, the saint of peace, the saint of simplicity. No pope before him had ever chosen that name. It was a message, a direction, a mission. From the start, Pope Francis broke traditions, not out of rebellion, but out of conviction. He declined luxurious papal apartments and chose to live in a modest guest house instead. He stopped using the papal limousine and rode in a humble Ford Focus. He embraced children, the elderly, the disabled, and the marginalized with a warmth no camera could fake. News outlets soon called him the People's Pope. Millions saw him as a refreshing symbol of hope, Some within the church praised him. Others felt threatened by his reforms. One of his first major actions was addressing the global refugee crisis. He traveled to Lampedusa, an island where thousands of migrants had drowned trying to reach Europe. Standing before the sea, he condemned what he called the globalization of indifference. He threw a wreath into the water, praying for the dead, calling the world to open its heart. He also focused heavily on church transparency. Under his leadership, the Vatican Bank underwent audits and reforms, aiming to eliminate corruption and restore trust. He created commissions on abuse within the church, demanding accountability and justice for victims, a painful but necessary step. But perhaps his most transformative impact came through his teachings on mercy, care for the environment, and inclusion. His encyclical Laudato Si became a global call to protect the planet, uniting scientists, activists, and religious communities. His message was clear. Climate change is a moral issue, a human issue, a responsibility we all share. He emphasized forgiveness, famously declaring, "Who am I to judge?" when asked about LGBTQ individuals seeking God. He reached out to divorced Catholics, prisoners, atheists, and people of all backgrounds. He washed the feet of women, Muslims, prisoners, something no pope had ever done before. But with reform came resistance. Some traditionalists accused him of going too far. Some criticized his openness, his inclusive tone, his shift in priorities. Yet Francis continued forward, reminding the world that the church is not a museum of perfect people, but a hospital for the wounded. His papacy also focused on issues like human trafficking, poverty, economic inequality, and global conflict. He visited war zones, refugee camps, disaster-stricken communities, bringing messages of peace and embracing those forgotten by society. Throughout his travels, one thing remained constant. He met people where they were. He laughed with children. He consoled grieving families. He visited prisons, telling inmates, "We all have something that makes us fall, and we all must get up again." In 2020, when the world was struck by the COVID-19 pandemic, Pope Francis became a symbol of spiritual resilience. In an empty St. Peter's Square, under the rain, he delivered the Urbi et Orbi blessing, a scene that became one of the most powerful images of the pandemic era. His solitary figure, standing before the crucifix, reminded millions that hope can exist even in silence, even in fear. As he aged, Francis faced health challenges, knee problems, surgery, and difficulty traveling, yet he continued working tirelessly, emphasizing dialogue, peace, and unity. He became a global moral voice in an age of polarization. Despite controversies and criticism, his legacy remains undeniable. He opened doors. He built bridges. He challenged systems. He shook institutions. He humanized the papacy. He reminded the world that leadership is not about power, but service. That faith is not about exclusion, but compassion. That the measure of a society is found in how it treats its weakest members. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, did not come from privilege or wealth. He had no connections to royal bloodlines or ecclesiastical dynasties. He grew up among working-class families in crowded streets, far from Rome, far from power. And perhaps that is precisely why the world needed him. A pope who took the bus. A pope who rejected titles. A pope who embraced the forgotten. A pope who sees God in every person, no exceptions. His story is not merely the biography of a religious figure. It is a reminder that greatness can rise from simplicity, that courage can come from humility, that leadership can grow from compassion. Pope Francis continues to inspire millions, Catholics, non-Catholics, and even those with no religion at all. His words echo in villages, cities, churches, and schools. The world can change, but it starts with you. His actions speak louder than doctrinal arguments. His humility stands stronger than any criticism. He is the first pope of his kind, and perhaps the one most aligned with the earliest teachings of the Church: love, mercy, justice. As history unfolds, one thing is certain: the papacy of Francis will be remembered not for crowns or ceremonies, but for the humanity he restored to an ancient institution. His journey, from a boy in Buenos Aires to the Bishop of Rome, is proof that sometimes the most unexpected people carry the greatest messages. And in a world hungry for compassion, dialogue, and hope, Pope Francis remains a voice that continues to echo, reminding us that kindness is power, mercy is strength, and humility is greatness.